Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Hangout on Air. I'm Krista Seiden, Analytics Advocate at Google, and today I'm going to be talking to you about building a culture of optimization. So let's take a quick look at our agenda. So a quick intro, then I'm going to talk about 4 key areas: educating teammates, evangelizing big wins, testing in action, and then a summary. So before we begin, a quick reminder, as always, submit your questions. You can do that in 2 ways. You can do it through the Hangout on Air chat box that you're all logged in through, or there's a form. So the link is right there on the screen, or in the invite that you joined for the HOA. I will answer your questions at the end, so definitely get a few in there. So a little bit more about me. I know many of you have seen me on air many times. For those of you who haven't, I'm currently the Analytics Advocate at Google. But previously, I actually ran optimization and analytics programs at several companies, most recently here at Google for 2 years in the Google for Work group. I mention that because as I go through this presentation, I'm actually going to give you a lot of examples from that time running that optimization program for the Google for Work group. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and dig in. So educating teammates, that's going to be our first topic. One of the first things that I like to tell people or get everybody on board with is, what is optimization? So optimization is the ongoing data-driven process of continually discovering and quantifying the most effective experience, both online and offline, for your consumers and customers. The next thing I like to teach people is, what is a test? And there are 2 different types of tests that people have in their minds. So the first is a true test. And that means that you are going to control for all of the variables in a test. The second, and what I hear most often from people, is what is called a time series test, which is not actually a true test. And this is launching, let's say launching a new website or a new web page, and 2 weeks later looking at the data and saying, oh, look, I got a 20% uplift in checkouts with the new web experience. Therefore, I've tested this and it's doing really well. Not actually a test, because it was just a before and after. There are a lot of variables that could have been impacting those results, such as seasonality, if there were different campaigns in market, or if there was a holiday, or all of these different outside variables that you can't actually control from because you didn't have an A/B test going at the time when you were looking at those examples. So try to go for the true test rather than the time series test. So once you understand what a test is, then you need to understand, what can you test? So the testing optimization person in me says, test everything. I would love to be able to run a test on everything that we do, everything that we put out on the web, but that's not actually always realistic, right? So you're going to have limitations, and generally those limitations are going to be traffic-based. So while we'd love to run hundreds of tests at a time, we only have so much traffic, and the number of concurrent tests in market is going to be dependent on that traffic. So for example, when I ran the Google for Work testing group, in the US, we would typically run a test on about 5% of website traffic per variation, because the US website got a lot of traffic, and that allowed us to have a lot of concurrent tests running and test a lot of different things at the same time. But all of our international sites got a lot less traffic compared to the US. So a test that we might run on 5% in the US would have to run on 25 or 30% in, say, Russia or Brazil or India. So know that your traffic is really going to limit how many tests you can have, and that's going to impact your roadmap, your planning process, your prioritization, and really everything that you do. So traffic is a very limiting factor when it comes to testing. And then testing versus analysis. So before you can actually get testing, you should understand what is best suited for a test versus what is best suited for analysis. So if you have a question of which layout works better for your website, that's probably best suited for a test. But if you have a question about what content people look at the most or does best, you could probably get that answer through analysis, looking at your analytics tool into Google Analytics and analyzing the data that you see for each piece of content. But they do go hand in hand, and the analysis can be used to justify high-value tests. Once you have a baseline of what is a test, then you need to get ideas for what you should test on your website. So I think it's really important to collect ideas from everyone in your organization. And I actually have a really good story about this. So when I was in the Google for Work group, we used to get test ideas quarterly. I would send out an email to my whole organization and ask for everybody to put test ideas into a testing spreadsheet. You'll actually see an example there on the screen. There's a short link so that you can actually get a copy of that example testing roadmap. But I would ask everybody to put their ideas into this spreadsheet once a quarter, and then we would go through and prioritize them. And the first couple quarters I did this, we really marketed this to marketing and sales to get their ideas. And then one quarter, our engineering team said, hey, we'd like to run a test. The Google for Work group, as a little bit of background, is the group that sells Gmail, Docs, Drive to businesses. And so the engineering team said, hey, we know that a significant portion of people who come and sign up for a trial of Google Apps for Work actually just are using Gmail. So why don't we change the headline of our website from what it said was discover a better way of working to get email for your domain. And marketing said, okay, like we'll run the test. We don't think it's going to win. No way. Like discover a better way of working. It's a very holistic story. We like that. It speaks to everyone. It sells our suite. So we ran the test. And 2 weeks later, the results validate. I happened to be traveling for work. I was in a very different time zone, halfway across the world, and I start to get frantic pings from marketing and from engineering, VPs on both sides saying, hey, this test won, we need to launch this right away, from engineering, and marketing saying, hey, don't you dare launch this, because the message was get email for your domain. It had won by a significant amount, but marketing didn't like it. They didn't like it because it didn't tell that holistic story. When it boiled down to what we were actually going to do, we did end up launching that headline because engineering had been really helpful in helping us develop our test program. So we wanted to make sure that we fostered that relationship. But then right after, we ended up launching a couple of follow-up tests to try to get back to a little bit more marketing-friendly message and kind of make everybody happy. But the moral of the story is twofold. One is that you can get really, really good test ideas from outside of your normal sphere. So engineering in this case had a really impactful test idea that really helped our business bottom line. And two, that when you collect ideas from everyone and you do decide to implement those tests, you need to make sure that everybody is on board with that message and that test variation that you're launching. Because if it does win, you should launch it to 100% of your traffic. So another thing that I like to tell people in this email when I ask for test ideas is reminding them to think about that low-hanging fruit. Give them some test examples of things that are really, really simple but very impactful to the business. So, for example, one of the very first tests that we ran in that Google for Work group was a simple CTA test. I'm sure that many of you have run a CTA test. For those who don't know, CTA means call to action. And you probably have had good results for your businesses. So in this case, we used to have a CTA on the website of start free trial. Starting a free trial was the main call to action of the Google for Work website, the Google Apps for Work website. So when I first started, I said, I wonder if we could do something about this. The words free and trial kind of have a negative connotation to me, like guerrilla marketing tactics. It makes me feel like I'm going to get a lot of spam or get, conned into using something I don't want to. Let's change that. So we tried out a few different CTAs. You can see them here on the screen. And what we found was Get Started blew everything away. 21% increase over Start Free Trial in the test period. And we actually retested this every quarter and after every major change to our website to see if it was still the right CTA for us, and it was. So the moral of this story is think about easy things because they can also be very, very impactful to your business. And make it fun. So every quarter when I would send out that email, I would put in a funny meme at the bottom, whether that was a dog or a cat, or at times a half-naked Ryan Gosling meme saying, hey girl, your call to action is definitely converting me. You want to remind people that testing is fun and that, that endears them to the process and makes them that much more excited about what you're doing and makes them want to get more involved. So once you've collected ideas across your organization, the next step is to make prioritization collaborative. So you want to go through with a group of your key stakeholders, engineering, sales, marketing, everybody in the same room at the same table, the pros and cons of each test design that's been submitted, the potential impact of each test and the relevance to the business, trade-offs of running one test versus another, and then at the end of it, you want to come out with a prioritized list of all the tests that you want to run for the quarter. So again, just a reminder back to that story I told you earlier, it's really important to have each of the different stakeholders sit down with you to make sure that everybody's on board with the tests that you're prioritizing and are going to run. Once you've prioritized those tests, throw it back into that testing roadmap. Make a Gantt chart or a sheet that shows everything that's been prioritized and the information about that so that everybody in the organization will have access to it and know what's going on in your testing process. That evangelizes the process of testing throughout your organization and really makes it accessible to everybody. So after you've taught everybody what a good test is and you've taken their ideas, now you need to teach them what a good test design is. So there are several different kinds of tests. I'm going to talk to you about two. There's A/B testing and multivariate testing. So an A/B test is two or more different variations of a website. So in this case, it's a one-column versus two-column sidebar test. A multivariate test tests variations of multiple elements in one test. So in this case, you're looking at a different color header and letters or numbers down the sidebar. And it'll do that in a lot of different combinations for you. So here is a possible example of an A/B test. A while ago, I was in Australia for a conference and I got to visit this really cool animal sanctuary, and I took a few cool pictures of koalas. And let's say I was working with their website and they wanted to have this new picture on their website of some koalas. And I say, well, let's A/B test what is the best koala picture here, or what's the best animal picture that we want on this website. So here's variation A and B. And I think this is a pretty solid test. You have koalas, you have a tree, like everything is pretty much the same here. But then the director says, hey, let's actually throw this third picture in and see if that works here too. He really liked the alligator and the people. It brought life to the website, he said. Well, I'm going to fight back and say this is probably not the best test design. So similarly, I'm going to tell you that this is a bad test design. And I'll tell you why. Earlier, I told you that a true test controls for all of the variables. In this case, we're not controlling for all of the variables. There are different color headers, different color buttons. One doesn't even have a button. There's so many different things going on here that you're not going to be able to isolate what actually drove the lift for your business. So this might be a better test design. Or this. Or this. Or one giant test with all of these different variations. But the key is to really isolate each individual variable, and so you'll know what was the one or two things that drove that lift for your business. So another thing that I like to remind people is good test design also includes what happens offline. So another story from my Google for Work days. We wanted to test the a phone number on the homepage of the Google Apps for Work website. We wanted to make the phone number to contact sales more widely accessible as a test. So what we did was we had our control that had no phone number and two variations with different CTAs, one that said ready to go Google and the other that said speak to sales. And they each had their own individual phone numbers. It might be hard to see on the slides, but they were unique phone numbers so that we would be able to track the difference in calls offline. What we didn't pay attention to here, though, was that once you click that contact sales form button, the form pops up and has a phone number on it. And that phone number was not the ones that are here on the website. It was our standard phone number, which was also easily found pretty much everywhere else on the web. That phone number was our control for this test. And so unfortunately, we had so many other ways of getting into the control that the numbers for the test weren't conclusive. So the key takeaway here was, even for that control, we need to make sure that we have a very controlled experience, a different phone number. And that way we have a really clear idea of what's going on even offline. So once you've designed a good test, you want to document it. So I have a link here for a sample test design. And this test design doc is really how I document everything that's going on in a test. So the date, the length of the test, the amount of traffic that it's testing on, a summary, a hypothesis, what are our success metrics, what are our different examples, screenshots of those examples. And this really serves as a living document for this test. Once I've documented everything in this format, I actually take a link to this document and I put it right back into that testing roadmap spreadsheet so that it's all accessible from one place. So one other thing I'd like to mention here is other types of testing. And I think qualitative testing is really important and can add a lot more insight to what you're doing quantitatively on your website. So you could have some kind of a satisfaction survey on your website asking if people were satisfied with that web experience or if they found everything that they were looking for. This is really important because I've actually run many, many tests where the quantitative results of the test were pretty flat. And it was hard to decide if one of those variations was, really something that we wanted to launch. And the deciding factor was actually the qualitative feedback that we received through these tests, where people were able to tell us that, they were more satisfied with the website in the new experience, or they found it more easier to navigate to the information that they needed. That was really, really important, even though we didn't necessarily see a gain in trials or whatever our success metric was there. Another cool thing about qualitative surveys is you can actually understand the makeup of your audience even more. So in this case, we are asking basically, who are you? Are you an analyst, a developer, a marketer? And that just gives you another lens to evaluate that data through later on. And then as you're teaching your organizations, you must also remind them to think about the stats. So I'm not actually going to give you a quick stats lesson here, but what I want you to take away from this slide is that making decisions on sound data is really, really important. And so when you're calculating the results for different tests, you need to make sure that you're reporting on and running, launching results that are statistically significant. I'll give you an example a little later on about why that's so important, but definitely if it's not you, have somebody in your team checking those numbers and making sure that they're sound. Okay, so that was our educating teammates section. Now I'm going to go into evangelizing big wins. So you found a big win. Now what? Well, you want to make sure that you have triple checked your results. Are they statistically significant? Did you control for external variables? So earlier in the talk, I told you that we ran our first CTA test, and we had a really big winner. So that winner was Start Here with a 23% increase on Start Free Trial. I was so excited about this. It was one of my very first tests that I ran with such big results. I drafted up a large email, sent it out to my whole organization, probably 250 people and VPs, and a lot of people on this mailing list. And I said, guess what, guys? We found a huge winner for our CTA test. We're going to have a new CTA. It's going to say Start Here. We're launching this on all of our websites next week. So I don't know about your organizations, but at Google, when you send out an email like that, you start getting reply alls saying, congratulations, woohoo, good job. So all of these were coming in, and I'm watching them come in, and it's kind of making me smile. And then I see an email come in from somebody in engineering. And that person said, hey, I noticed that we're getting a lot of spammy trials that are coming from that variation that you had of Start Here. Did you control for spam trials coming from the Philippines? Well, I hadn't. I hadn't even thought of that, unfortunately. So when we reran the results and took out all of the foreign traffic and isolated it down just to the US, and also reran the test looking at the same thing, we still had a really big winner. If you were paying attention earlier, I actually told you the winner was Get Started, and it was, with a 21% increase. So still a really, really good win, a really great story, just not the one that I had actually already told all of my organization about. So I had to send out another email to everybody in the organization telling them, hey, we still have a really big winner, just not the one I mentioned earlier. Our new CTA is going to be Get Started. So moral of this story is you want to triple check those results. Make sure that when you are sending out those results to your organization, you're really, really confident in what you're telling them, because you don't want to have to go back and tell them something different later. And once you've found that big win, make a deck, have an executive summary, use that test design, tell everybody what it is that you did and the results from that test. Get it in front of all of your relevant stakeholders, schedule a review meeting, really evangelize that big win across your organization. And then throw a link to that presentation back into your testing roadmap to make sure that anybody can go back and see it at any time, because that just makes this that much more accessible to everyone. Okay, so we've covered a few things so far. Let's now dive into testing in action. So I started at Google on September 24th, 2012. And when I did, the Google Apps for Business website looked like this. Exactly 2 years later, I left the Google Apps for Business, now Google Apps for Work group, and went over to the Google Analytics team for my current role as Analytics Advocate. And this is what the website looked like when I left. So how did we get there? That's a pretty big jump. Well, we ran a lot of tests. Over 2 years, we ran 453 unique variations on 159 tests in 25 locales across 4 product lines. And from all of that, we took away over 50 really key learnings that we used to develop our new website. So what did we test? Well, I already told you we tested CTAs. We tested lots of CTAs, our trial CTA, our contact sales CTA, amongst many others. We also tested headlines. I told you about that Discover Better Way of Working headline and the Get Email for Your Domain headline that really blew everything away. We also tested stock photography versus real-life event photography versus the cartoony stuff that we used to have on the website. So we even tested kind of in-action time of event type photography with the World Cup in Brazil at the time, and saw significant gains. People were really interested that we were kind of relevant and on topic at the moment. We tested a lot of different variations of our pricing page. We went from kind of a really awful, hard to read chart to something that was much more digestible for people. And we even tested several variations of a demo. So if it was just a really lightweight click through, see different pictures of something, to a little bit more in depth, you can click around and do a few things in that demo, to something that was essentially a sandbox of our products that allowed people to really get in and try out what they were doing. And we tested all of these to see at what point in the process were people needing what level of touch with a demo. So which test won? You can see on the left was the test that we ran against the new design on the right. So before I tell you which test actually won, let me give you a little bit of background. So for a year and a half, we'd been running this testing program by the time we got to this new website. And we really wanted to make sure that when we launched this new website, we had a very solid plan in place for what would result in a winner. So what we did was we said, okay, we have a 30-day trial process. So if we see when at the time of the test, after 2 weeks, we're going to run it. And after 2 weeks, if we see that our trials have increased, trial starts have increased by 5% or more, we won't wait that 30-day time period to see if they convert to pay, because we know that a 5% increase or more is going to make sure that we're at least flat to positive on paid conversions later on. However, if we don't see at least a 5% increase in trial starts, we're not going to launch this website right away. We're going to go back to the drawing board and figure out exactly where we can optimize. So what happened? Well, we ran the test for 2 weeks and we didn't see that 5% increase. So instead, I went back into Google Analytics and I found a couple of really key areas that we could improve upon. And that included the color of our trial button. The new blue buttons on the website were getting a lot less action than the green buttons had. It included our pricing page, which the new website had taken away some of the color and the animation that we had, or sorry, the pictures that we had on the optimized old page. So we brought that back into the new version. And finally, it looked at animation. The new website had some animation below the fold that if you scrolled too fast, it wouldn't actually load, and it looked like an empty page. So we changed a bunch of those things and reran a few tests. And what we found was we actually got to that point, that 5% increase, where we felt very comfortable launching that new variation. So we called that our rapid optimization plan at the time. I've got a blog post about it on my website if you want to check that out. But it was a really good way to quickly dive in, figure out where our trouble spots were, optimize them quickly so that we could launch that new website to the public. All right, so we've talked about a lot. let's go ahead and wrap up with some action and summary. So culture shift is an ongoing process. It doesn't happen overnight, but it can start with one big win. You need to keep the momentum and cadence in your organizations. People love to see big wins, and they love to hear that you're constantly doing tests. Bring everyone along, marketers, sales, devs, engineering, and execs. They can all have really, really good ideas. So reach across those teams for input and ideas. And consider a roadshow of your big wins across different groups and stakeholders to continue to build that momentum across your organization. And finally, let's make it actionable. So a few things that you can do this week, next week, to start building your cultures of optimization. First, build a roadmap and make it accessible to your whole organizations. Google Docs is really great for that because you can share across organizations really easily. Teach others good test design. It's really important that everybody has a baseline understanding of what makes a good test, because then they can really help you ideate even more. Remember the math. Stats is really important. You don't want to send out an email to your whole organization telling them that you had one winner when you really had another. Prioritize the low-hanging fruit. Even CTAs can result in really big wins. And finally, share your enthusiasm for testing with your organization, because it is contagious and people will really thrive off of that. So our resources, as always, support.google.com/analytics. Our Analytics Academy, analyticsacademy.withgoogle.com, is a great resource. We have 5 courses on there right now for you to learn analytics, optimization, mobile, and tag management. And finally, our GA360 Google Plus community for those who are 360 customers. So you can also reach out to us on social media at Google Analytics, or I'm at Krista Seiden. So with that, thank you very much, and I will now take your questions. Just give me 1 second to go ahead and move on over to our question doc. Okay, so I see that our first question is from Rod, and he wants to know, is this Hangout going to be recorded because it's at 4 a.m. wherever he is in the world? Yes, Rod, it will be recorded. We will post it on social media after so that you can go ahead and watch it at any point. Question from Patty. What are some good examples of tests we should run on our site? We're a retail shop. So that's a great question, Patty. It's really going to depend on what your goals and KPIs of your shop is. If you're retail, you probably want to optimize for checkouts or add to carts or product views. And so maybe play around with things like moving different products to a more prominent place on your website. So if you look in your analytics tool, hopefully it's Google Analytics, you can see which products are most popular and kind of understand their placement on your website. And maybe you can either make those more prominent, or if there's a product that you really want to push that you're not seeing a lot of sales for, maybe move that to a more prominent spot and see if you can drive those add to carts or those checkouts. That's just one example. There's many more. I think there's a lot of great research out there online, but try that one out. All right, our next question is from Ned. What's a good base number for A/B testing a site? What if we only have a few hundred visits a day? I think by base number, you probably mean how much traffic do I need to test? There's no right or wrong answer here, but in general, we like to go with the idea that you test on a place that you have a decent amount of traffic. I test on my blog all the time, and many times I only have a few hundred visits a day or even less. So you can definitely do it. It's just the trade-off between your resources and your traffic, right? So if you have the extra resources to go ahead and run a test, definitely do it. Prioritize things that are really prominent on your website, like a sign-up button or a checkout button, and run one test at a time, maybe with just one variation, because you do have low traffic. If you have a lot more traffic, you can get a lot more specific with all the different things that you want to test and run more concurrent tests at a time. All right, Lisa wants to know, there were lots of examples on testing copy. Did you test colors or sizes for links and buttons, or even a site background for time on site and click-through rates? So that's a great question, Lisa. We did test a lot of copy, but we did test button color. I told you in that rapid optimization plan, we tested a green button, which had been on our site for so long and really drew people's attention, against that blue button, which didn't work quite as well for that organization. So there are a lot of different things that you can test, copy being one of them. Definitely background pictures, button color, different links. All of that is testable, and I encourage you to go ahead and try some out on your website. Alice wants to know, Did you run any user tests when you renamed the product as Analytics 360 Suite? So I wasn't part of that naming process, but it's my understanding that we did run a lot of this through test groups and got a lot of feedback on what we were naming it. Mindy wants to know, what do you do if marketing wants copy that is brand friendly but doesn't perform well? So Mindy, that's a great question, and it's exactly what I talked about when I mentioned the discover a better way of working versus get email for your domain example. Marketing loved discover a better way of working because it was holistic. They were trying to sell a suite of tools, and they wanted to tell the world that with this suite of tools, you could discover a better way of working. So what we ended up doing was we launched that get email for your domain as our headline, but those follow-up tests actually brought back some of that copy for not only just get email for your domain. In the subcopy we had and Docs Drive and more, or different examples of how it really was a holistic suite. So work with your different teams, try to come up with something that is targeted to that group that you're really trying to reach. In our case, it was users looking for email, but also have subtext or a different area of your site, how it can really be a little bit more marketing friendly. Another question regarding G-Apps, how totally changed the conversion to new trials during 2 years? So that's a really great question. I actually ran a test in February of 2013, I believe, or February of 2014, where I looked at all of the major changes that we had made up for about the previous year. And what I did was I took a fresh copy of the website as of that date, and I turned back in time the things that we had changed, such as the headline and the CTAs and the pricing page layout. So I used all of the current goodness of SEO and all of the different things that we had developed on the website. I just changed back the copy and the site areas that we had changed over the course of the year. And what we found was actually about a 30% increase year over year with trial signups. So our bottom line had increased, growing at a 30% rate in the year. So you can definitely quantify the total impact of all of the tests that you're running in one test like we did. Question, did we test different apps trial duration? I don't think we did. I think we were playing with it, but that was a much more holistic test with actual parts of the product versus just the website, which we had a lot more control over. Corey wants to know, how did you overcome the challenge of convincing running a test that may necessitate development work, for example, needing resources outside the analytics or marketing team? So Corey, that is a really great question, and that is definitely a problem that I ran into many, many times. So that's where the prioritization process really is important. So we had different factors that we considered in the prioritization process. One was how much business impact, but another was how difficult is it going to be to run this test or to develop this test. And we had limited development resources every quarter allocated to us. So the ones that took only a small amount of development resources, or even things that I could code myself, those actually tended to get priority, with the exception of 1 or 2 pretty heavy development tests per quarter that we did have the development resources for. So it was really, part of that prioritization process to decide if it was really resource dependent, was that at the top of our list for those things? And if it wasn't resource dependent, perhaps we could get that prioritized a little bit higher and faster. If from the point of metrics, everything in your variation is fine, but during the survey you discovered something bad, what would the resulting action be? So I think this question is really back to that qualitative survey. So I mentioned that at times I've run qualitative surveys on my quantitative tests to really be that deciding factor if we do see something flat. And I think if we saw negative results from the qualitative surveys, that would be the deciding factor. We wouldn't go ahead and launch that variation. Ryan wants to know, I have an analytics setup with GTM on my site. Is content experience available with GTM? Great question, Ryan. I don't believe that you can currently launch the content experiment snippet via GTM. I think you have to hard code that on your page. Martine wants to know, what does the best optimization team look like? That's a good question. I think that optimization teams can come in many different shapes and forms. And really it starts with, in my opinion, it starts with a really solid analyst, somebody that knows the business, knows where to look in the data, and can identify those points, such as a low performing button or an underperforming page that really can serve as a good place to start testing. But also it's somebody who's going to be creative, think of different ideas, and really kind of rally people around that idea and drive that momentum in the business to actually get tests up and running. All right, so I think that's all of the questions that we have for today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. This has been great. And I will see you again on the next Hangout on Air. Bye.